shell, when we dry out, actually the moisture inside actually being expand. So that's why the shell outside one easily being so-called separate out the thing. So when we go through the winnowing part, then we can easily separate out the shell and also the nibs. So I think the juice part is the nibs itself, which is actually converted to a cocoa ingredient. So from the cocoa nib itself, actually we need to go through alkalization. It's depending on alkalization actually mainly for the color, because different color of the cocoa powder one, they have a different application. So meaning the alkalization part actually play the part on the recipe itself. And then the alkaline nibs become alkaline nibs, and then we go through another roasting. So you can imagine that when you roast a coffee bean or a cocoa bean, you can imagine that kind of smell. So our plant actually is we always can have this kind of smell, so very enjoying. So after roasting part, actually then of course we grind the thing and become a cocoa mash. So this cocoa mash or cocoa liquor is actually will be go through a pressing, and then we press out the thing, and then we have about generally maybe 50-50 So cocoa butter actually will be 50% come out, and cocoa cake is actually another 50%. So from the cocoa cake itself, then actually we go through another milling to become a cocoa powder. So I think in terms of the product wise, actually just now I mentioned that we have a cocoa mash, we have cocoa butter, we have cocoa cake, and also a cocoa powder. But of course, actually in terms of the contribute to our main sales, actually is the cocoa powder as well as the cocoa butter. So for this part actually is then actually we supply to our so-called customer, like for example Nestle or Hershey or others or Mars. So that ingredient actually they will be so-called our cocoa product. They mix with some sugar, milk, other ingredient, and then they go through mixing, refining, grinding, conching, and a tempering part to produce their finished product, the cocoa, the chocolate. So if let's look at the dotted line here, actually is our plant in Malaysia and Indonesia actually is covering on this area. Yeah. So I hope that now you have a better idea on in terms of process actually what we are so-called involved. So of course, when it comes to later part, I will be talk about the carbon accounting. So I think that's most important is actually is when we account for the carbon part, actually we first of all actually we really need to understand the boundary of our process. So from there on, then you can identify that any sources of the emission part actually is we need to account. So from there, then only that we can solely identify the thing. So maybe next one actually subsequent will be lead you to on the carbon accounting part. Okay, so now start our journey, ESG journey. So I think just to recap, so mean that what is the ESG? But before that, actually is now why we talk about ESG is because now in terms of the business is actually the world changed a bit. So mean that now actually it's getting more younger people already. So young people actually being so-called exposed to a lot of this kind of information that from the social media one. So they are being so-called educated and also is also aware on this kind of the impact. So I think they want to protect their generation. So that part actually in terms of the stakeholder, we got to switch our focus on the young people also. So that's why you can see that now a lot of those that decision maker from the big company one is actually with the young generation one. Is actually they will start to look at a company when they assess a company. Actually, they are not only assessing their financial part, but they're also looking at what are your so-called corporate responsibility that you will be demonstrated by a company. So that's why here I recap here actually is last time actually we used to company success is driven by the financial performance, but nowadays actually is no longer that way already. So ESG play a much larger role in this process. So that's why this is a non-financial indicator that provide a performance criteria of how a business is doing in regards to its social responsibility. Okay, so I think that is to sum up a bit on what is the ESG. I believe that previous speaker talk about this thing as well. So, and okay, I think before we go into a detail one, also maybe I just share a bit, recap a bit on our our supply chain. So I mean that our supply chain actually is starting from the farmer side itself. So farmer, of course, actually they got to do so-called cocoa planting, and then after that they will do the harvesting and fermentation. So this is actually to show you that is how the cocoa tree here, the farmer at the producing country, like for example those that are Ecuador or just now we talked about Ivory Coast, which is the main supplier. So then after that, actually we have they fermented already, and then the dry one actually they pack into the garnish sack, and then this is ready for export. So of course during the exporting time, actually they have some bean quality control and exporting. So to a certain extent, actually for JP Cocoa side, we also involving on this quality check also to ensure that it's the traceability for the bean itself. And then after that, the thing actually will be import to Malaysia plant or Indonesia one. Then we have a bean grinding and pressing. Just now I shared with you on to produce the cocoa ingredient products lah. So that is at the GB Cocoa factory. And then after that, once actually completed the cocoa bean, the cocoa, we produce the cocoa powder or butter. Then actually we supply to our customer. So they will be turned into a chocolate or those that chocolate drink or the powder. So I think that is the entire supply chain. So when you talk about sustainability, actually is we are covering from the farm to forks, which is actually is our product that we consume. So that is the area that actually we are focusing for our sustainability initiative. So to share with you is actually, I believe that ESG element is not new to JB Cocoa, but I believe that most of our customer also is not new to them. I believe that right now they have a lot of practices that right now they're in their plant one, they have a waste management system, how they manage their waste, how they segregate their general waste and scheduled waste, how they do their proper measurement of their water consumption, electricity consumption, and then maybe they have some proper system that to manage their so-called to govern their whole processes. So all this one actually is part of the ESG. But I think the great challenge is actually to formalize it to become a proper sustainability management framework or even a manual as to guide the thing that how we plan it, we strategize it, and then we monitor it, and then we report it. So I think that is actually is a bit more on the formalize our practices. I believe that most of us actually we did have this kind of practices, but it's only how we so-called formalize it. So I think this one previously, I think somebody also is asking that how we start the thing, the sustainability part. So in terms of developing an entire framework, and first of all, we need to understand is actually for a company, who is actually our main stakeholder, their concern. So we got to prioritize on the stakeholder part. And then subsequently, actually, we got to look at what are the materiality that we need to focus on, because a lot of things that we need to do, but what is actually the great impact to our business one we need to identify. So I think that is actually we call as a so-called materiality assessment. So that is the first part that we really need to do that one. So if let's say look at our journey at JB Cocoa one, is actually we already having our so-called waste to energy plant since 2007 already. But it's actually a small scale But after that, actually, is I think recently in 2019, actually we replaced with a larger biomass fire boiler. So that is one of the things. And also, I think back to 2017, also we did have so-called building a sustainable cocoa source, which is actually work with the farmer side in Indonesia. So we are focusing on a certain farmer that make sure that we educate them. So I think we started our program since 2017 also. So of course, actually, is because this company actually listed in Singapore side, so there's some guideline that for us to report our sustainability. So I think in 2019, I think in the market there's many of the sustainability framework that we need to use. So one of them actually is in 2019, actually we report our sustainability report using based on the GRI standard, Global Reporting Initiative. And then in 2020 is actually we having our UN SDG, which is aligned with the UN SDG that kind of go to report our sustainability. So I think that is actually some of the area that actually we work on the sustainability. Then I think just now I talk about formalize the thing is actually that's why we engage with a third party, a consultant that developing our sustainability management framework. So on this part, yeah. So I think. Sorry. Datin, can you hear me?
Clear.
Okay. Sorry. So I think in 2021 actually is we start to have engaging a third party to start developing our sustainability management framework. So we go exercise that we gather all those key people and also together with the top management also evolving on crafting the thing. Just now we talk about what we want to identify, what is the materiality, who actually our stakeholder that we go to put a priority on that part. So on that one actually is we do on that part, and also during that year is actually we start to doing renewable energy on the solar panel, and also last year also we are focusing on the replacing with the cleaner energy which is LPG fire boiler, and also in last year also we start to do our carbon accounting, which is later I share a bit on the carbon accounting. So I believe that on the sustainability part actually this journey actually is continuous one, we can't stop. And as long as you want to sustain your business, this is the thing that is the continued improvement that we got to really embark onto it. So that's the continuing our sustainability initiative. So I think that's to give you some overview on our thing that we're covering on the farm to the farm level and also our plant level. So later part will be talk about the detail on this thing. Yeah. So why we talk about sustainable sourcing is because I think the bigger risk for GB cocoa side is actually is the supplier of the cocoa bean itself. If let's say you are not taking care of the cocoa bean itself, end of the day, my raw material actually I can't get the thing. So that's actually giving us that we need to really have a sustainable sourcing, which is actually we got to work a lot with the farmer side. So that's why under this kind of the current threat of, like, for example, those are global warming right now, pandemic issue, productivity of the farmer that they grow one, their living standard. If let's say they are planting the tree like Malaysia one, a lot of those that are planting the rubber one actually switching because actually can't sustain because of the pricing. So that part actually we got to ensure the farmer actually they have a minimum that kind of living standard that they can go continue for this kind of the planting. So we have a quite numbers of programs that on this sustainable sourcing. So I think at GB Cocoa is actually we committed to help so-called cocoa farmer to in building their sustainable cocoa sourcing. So we do have some program that share our good agricultural practices. So mean that in terms of the soils, actually how frequent that we need to take to replace the thing, fertilizer that we use one. We cut the tree one. So and also we set up a cocoa support center to provide coaching and training to them, provide them a technical that kind of the information, knowledge, education to them, how to be a good having a good agriculture practices. And also we have a nursery program mostly in Indonesia side. And also we also participate in the forest protection. Of course, actually we can anyhow to cut the thing. And also those that cocoa plant is actually is growing well. If let's say we have a big tree that's shading, so-called they call as a shading forestation. So that is actually one of the area we also helping our customer, our farmer side to increase their productivity side. So and also we also participate in their farmer livelihood and also community engagement with them. So that is the some of the farm level that we have lah. So in terms of the sustainability program that at farm level one, some of the photo here actually just to share that this is a real cases that we have for the last few years one. Like for example, we have a nursery program with them to do a planting, farm diversification and reforestation. And also because actually we want to increase their so-called income for that part. Actually we work with them that to ensure that is the bean is actually each of the thing actually we're able to track and also to trace the thing, and also any process actually being transparent. So with that kind of the minimum requirement they're able to meet, then actually we can offer a premium payment to a farmer. So I think that is one of the program that we have here at Indonesia side and also some of the Africa side also. So this is at the so-called another side that actually we have a farmer training and coaching for the better practices. And also we talk about the human right, child protection and social support on this part also lah, which is actually there's quite number of the child so-called labor over that side. So that part actually we need to educate them also. Then actually we have some program that provide them education to younger people one. So we have a sensitization for the forest protection to give us some training, awareness training to them. Actually, is we got to protect the forest in order to so-called protect to having better soil, that kind of thing, and also the ecosystem. So I think that is actually some of the sustainability program that we have at the farm level. So next, actually, I goes to the plant level, which is actually I talk about the three area: carbon accounting, renewable energy, and also cleaner energy. So I believe before that we go into the carbon accounting, it's good that maybe right now it's good that for us to understand why actually is so urgent that we need to tackle the carbon issue. So I believe that actually is previously we know that actually it's actually a balance, that kind of thing. Is whenever the carbon being generated from our activity, the human activity actually is absorbed by the so-called forest or plantation or ocean, which is as a carbon sink. But nowadays it's no longer that way already. It's a lot of thing is actually is being produced. Yet it's actually a lot of this kind of the carbon sink actually being affected, that we do a deforestation, no more tree to absorb the thing under the forest photosynthesis, and also the ocean also is polluted, that actually is reduced that kind of the storage of the carbon. So that's why it actually is at the COP26 it actually is giving us a code rate that showing that it's actually at alarm states that we got to protect, otherwise actually human will be extinct. Because of this kind of the imbalance of the carbon cycle, it's actually leading to a temperature rise that you can feel. So why actually is we feel so hot nowadays, and then even though we go outside also we feel that very painful on our skin. So this is actually, if let's say look at their data that they have one extracted from the website one, it's actually if let's say look at their benchmarking with 18 year this period, it's about 1.28. But if let's say you are benchmarking with 1950 something, that kind of period, that's actually the increase is about 1. So I think that actually can show you that previously we thought that actually this is a natural cycle that end of the day they will be so-called balance out the thing easily. But it seems that now based on the scientific data that we have and also a lot of researches that from the IPCC one or the UNFCCC one actually concluded that is really that this is a thing that is actually leading us to extinction if let's say we are not doing something. So that is actually is causing us that we have a global warming issue and which is leading to the climate change lah. So in terms of differentiate between the global warming and the climate change is global warming actually is an increase in the Earth's average surface temperature due to the rising of the global greenhouse gases. And this is actually impact to the long-term change in the Earth on the climate side. So this is why we can see we have an extreme that kind of the weather that we experience right now. So this goes to the impact itself. So impact is actually a lot. So you can see that some actually is the coral actually damaged, the warmer ocean, the more droughts that we have one like Australia wildfires. Still remember back in 2019, and also I think back to 2015 actually we have an India road asphalt. You can imagine that actually the asphalt on the road actually is start melting. So you can see the temperature actually can exceed about 40 over that kind of the degrees Celsius. Then just now, I think from PwC, I think the speaker also talked about the Antarctica, that iceberg broke away, that kind of thing. So I think no more polar, actually no place for them to stand on the South Pole or North Pole already. So I think that's the impact that we can see. So if let's say look at the so-called sea level rise also, I think if let's say look at the left-hand side one, the sea level is actually high tide one. Actually, this is when they do the study, it actually is in 2020 projection. So, but because actually is the increase actually they didn't expect that actually the temperature rise is so quickly that actually when after the recent study one, they found that actually by 2050, this is all area actually being flooded. So you can see that it's actually we can't wait for the thing that slowly have some policy or something that slowly that we remove. So we need to react. So I think the most impact that I see recently one, I think just now a lot of people also talk about the Malaysia flooding thing. So I think this is the impact that we can see. So sometimes actually people talk about, oh, this is we got to blame to the natural disaster, but ultimately this is because of the human activity leading to this kind of the natural disaster. So I think that's the facts. A lot of scientific data that proven on this part. So we understand this kind of impact, and then why actually the global warming is so-called tense is actually those are our activity, human activity that we produce the greenhouse gases one is actually a gas that absorb and then emit the radiant energy in an atmosphere. So they're causing this kind of the so-called greenhouse effect on the Earth. So when we talk about the greenhouse gases, we always talk about the CO2 emission. But if let's say if let's say you want to look at the definition of the greenhouse gas, it actually is a quite number of those gases, like for example N2O, methane gas. Methane gas is like, for example, when we have a dairy farm that a lot of cow that actually go, so their so-called their facets or the shit is actually after fermentation they produce the methane gas. So that methane gas is actually one of the greenhouse gases as well. And then, of course, standard one CO2, and also we have sulfur hexafluoride. This is mainly used in our insulation of transformer. So you want to insulate our transformer, actually, sometimes actually we put in this kind of gas, or those that nitrogen trifluoride is actually used a lot in semiconductor industry. And also we have a hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbon. This is we found in our refrigerant and our aircon. So sometimes when you go to a workshop, people ask that we want to have a better expensive one, so which is actually the most expensive one actually is the less impact to the environment one. So that's why a lot of those hydrofluorocarbon is we are phasing out slowly. So all these greenhouse gases one actually have a different range. So that's why they have a GMP. If let's say you look at the accounting part, actually they have talked about the global warming potential. So global warming potential is meaning that it's actually like, for example, I have 1 ton of the CO2. So the impact is actually is this amount. But if let's say I have a 1 ton of the methane gas CH4 that released to the atmosphere, is equivalent to 21 ton of the CO2. So 1 ton of CO2, the impact, and 1 ton of CO4, the impact is actually different. So that's why when we measure the carbon accounting ESG, we need to refer back to their GWP. So for example, like here one, just I mentioned the methane gas 21 ton. So each of the 1 ton of methane gas, 21 ton of CO2 equivalent will be emitted. And then for example, the nitrous oxide is 310 times of the 1 ton of the CO2. So and SF6 that actually is almost 24,000 ton of one CO2 being equivalent, and also freon gas as well. So I think when you talk about the carbon accounting, GWP is actually play a part on this thing. It's not like 1 ton of the methane I count and then 1 ton of the CO2 I count. So that one I add out about 2 ton of the CO2. Not that way, because the impact, the impact level actually different. So they got to under the IPCC. They differentiate between the using this GMP, and then after that, after you sum up the thing, that is become the equivalent of the CO2 equivalent now, which is CO2e. So from here one, then actually we can determine what is the carbon footprint for the entire company. That's the carbon footprint when talk about is actually is a total. So I think that's to give you some idea on the greenhouse gases. So next is actually is on the carbon accounting. So maybe on that part, actually, I try to have a bit more time talk about this thing. So of course, actually, this is the journey that we have on the carbon accounting. So for SME company, it's actually when we started this carbon accounting, we need to understand our business goal for this kind. What's the purpose of this 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐬 accounting? Because of our so-called voluntary, or there's a mandatory requirement from the government side or policy maker that actually driving us that we need to report the thing. So that's one thing. Like for example, Singapore side, those that company exceeded emitted more than 25,000 ton of the CO2 one, actually they will be charged by the carbon pricing, carbon tax at about about $5 per ton. So that's a mandatory that actually those that a big generator, they got to report the thing. So I think that is no choice, it's driven by the policy. So they got to report. So other is actually is some of the company actually is doing this kind of thing is actually they want to identify, because right now government haven't do any action on the carbon pricing or carbon tax or whatever thing. So now in order for you to prepare in future there will be additional cost or additional risk to your business. It's good that maybe it's now actually got to really identify already which aspect actually is producing the most so-called carbon CO2e, the emission, the carbon dioxide emission part. So that part actually once you identify, then only that you can so-called have a way that to reduce it. Some of the initiative that to reduce the thing, instead of using, like for example, you use a lot of diesel in your plant. So on that part, actually, maybe you want to think of switching this kind to because diesel actually is more so-called impact to the environment compared to a cleaner one, like for example LPG or those are LNG, that kind of thing. So you can start to work on that part. So by the time actually when you're switching to this kind of cleaner gases or fuel, then by the time when the government has actually of tax on this part, actually then you can save a lot on this unnecessary cost to the business lah. So I think that's first part on the business goal for the 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐬 accounting. Of course, some of the company doing the accounting is they want to trade, they want to use this carbon credit to trade in the market. For example, let's say for example I have one project. So previously actually is like for example those that sludge actually they send for landfill. So when those that from the in that water one, that kind of the sludge they send for landfill. So when you send for landfill, they're bound to have a fermentation and then produce this kind of the methane gas. So now I have a project that to take back all this sludge and then I use the incinerator to burn it off. So by having this kind of thing, then you can reduce a lot of this kind of carbon emission. So when you reduce this kind of carbon emission, then that kind of the quantum that you reduce one, you can trade in the market. You can sell it to, as they call, as a carbon credit in the carbon trading market. So that's some of the objective that goal that you set under this thing. So once you identify the thing already, and then you need to define your accounting boundary. Maybe some of the company, SME or those that big company want, they have many branches, or some of the branches is actually equity wise, actually maybe they only have about 50% equity or maybe 60%. So that part actually is you need to define your on the on the so-called define in terms of your organization boundary. So once you define that part already, you define the thing, then only subsequently we go to another boundary, which is on the operation. So I think those are people when start to learn about the carbon accounting, I think they're familiar with the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So that is actually is to account for one carbon accounting is actually there will be consists of these 3 scopes, scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is actually is those that direct emission from the plant activity, which is meaning that actually if let's say my company actually we are getting the plant, we are getting the bin from the import from the bin, and then we are starting from the bin itself, we start to process, and then after that we produce our product. So that is my operational entity that whenever the activity here one producing the CO2 one or other greenhouse gases one, I need to account for that one. So that is actually we call as a direct emission. So that is the first scope 1 that we need to identify. Another boundary is actually we need to look at is actually is on the scope 2. Scope 2 is referring to those that indirect emission. Indirect emission meaning that is actually if let's say my plant, in order for me to run this plant, I need to have purchased the electricity from TNB. So when I purchase the electricity on that TNB side is every megawatt hours that I consume one is equivalent to how much CO2 will be generated. So that's a one emission factor that we need to based on the government standard to use it. So the more that you purchase the electricity, the more that you are account for the CO2 emission. So that is actually is lumped under scope 2. So at this moment is on in terms of the corporate accounting part actually is pretty a lot of company, especially SME also maybe they only focus on the scope 1 and scope 2. But those that last company one is more so-called corporate responsibility one, actually they got to publish their data even though include the scope 3. So scope 3 meaning that it's actually indirect emission other than the purchased electricity, meaning that it's actually is the, like for example our case is actually is starting from the farm side. So when the farm is actually is they do the fermentation, they do have some waste produced. So that's the upstream thing, the activity that generating the CO2 or the greenhouse gases. So that part actually starting from that one, they do the fermentation, and then after that the dried one, they pack it into a garnish sack, and then they store in the storeroom, and then after that they transfer to the transportation, go to the shipment, and then send it to Malaysia side. So along the way, it's actually any activity one is actually involving the CO2 or greenhouse gases emission one. That is I need to account for my scope 3. So when I come to my plant, that one actually I process it. Then after that, my product I send it to the downstream, which is for example my customer, I engage with the transporter, I ship it out the thing. So along the way, it's actually is the process, the downstream that is account for the scope 3. So that actually is to sum up the thing is we have a scope 1 is within our emission that within our activity in the plant 1, and then we have scope 2 is our indirect emission that from the purchase of the electricity, and the scope 3 is actually our upstream that processes that involving the emission and also the downstream. So we add out the together is actually that is actually to give you a broad idea on how much is my carbon footprint. So that is actually is define your accounting boundary. So after that, it's actually is after that, then the most challenging is actually on the identify the emission stream. So meaning that I'm starting receiving my bin, and then from the bin itself to produce the product, in between actually any activity that generating the carbon emission one, I need to account, I need to identify. So to as a guideline for this part actually is first actually we look at the aspect of the source, emission source is actually is on the stationary combustion. Stationary combustion is referring to the boiler that using the diesel fuel, or meaning that you have some engine and that burning the diesel one, that is stationed in the plant one. So that one actually you need to identify that is the source of the fossil fuel that will be when you go through the combustion, they'll be producing the CO2. So that is one of the areas. Second actually is also the combustion, but it's actually a mobile one. So within your plant one, there's a forklift using, then actually consume a lot of this kind of diesel. So that kind of diesel, how much per year that you consume, there's an emission factor that you can calculate it to become how much actually is your carbon. So that is the another area. And then after that is actually is we have a process emission, meaning that if let's say you have some process that will be producing the emission one, Like for example, you are using some carbonate, or maybe there's some reaction that happened that to produce a lot of methane gas or the CO2. So that actually you need to identify and account for it also. How much actually is the CO2 being generated? So the fourth one actually is the fugitive emission, meaning that some of the plant actually have a flaring one. So they flare off their so-called unwanted gases. So that part is also you need to account for, and like some actually is like wastewater treatment plant. You have a biological treatment plant or anaerobic or aerobic one. So a lot of this kind of CO2, because of the biological processes, a lot of CO2 being generated or methane gas. So this methane gas or CO2 we need to capture also. It's part of the emission source. So the last part is actually on the product use lah. So product use is meaning that in our plant we have a refrigerant. We are using a Freon 23 or whatever thing. So whenever a replacement or obsolete one we discharge. Or some fire protection system that we have a CO2 fire extinguisher. So when we come to a replacement, so we release out the thing one. So all this one being released to atmosphere one, we got to account for the carbon emission. So that's one to give you some idea on where is the carbon in our plant actually is we need to capture. So that is actually under the identified emission stream now. Then after is actually one we have this one, we identify the thing really. Then we can start to do the emission quantification. So of course, quantification part, actually, there's later I'll show you that how we quantify the thing. And then we start to compute, we get the data, compute, and then we have an inventory this year, next year, then we monitor, and then we report. So I think that's the whole process that for the carbon accounting. Of course, actually, is we need to ensure the quality lah. So we need to have a so-called under the 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐬 protocol one, we need to have a relevancy, and then we have a completeness, consistency, transparency, and also accuracy. So this is the 5 principles that we need to demonstrate in our carbon management system. Yeah, so just now I mentioned about the account quantification is actually we have a method one. We can use a method one is by calculation. So under the IPCC guide one is we have a formula to calculate. So what you need to do is, for example, diesel use for my forklift. So the whole year actually how much actually I'm using the diesel. So I need to identify, and then there's a one so-called NCV, the calorific value. There's a formula, and then emission factor, and also just now talk about the global warming potential. So you plug in this figure, then you're able to get what is the total emission that so-called generated from my forklift activity. So that's one of the area calculation. Second actually is on the direct measurement. So let's say, for example, I have a burning the LPG. So LPG burning the thing, and then the combustion CO2 being generated. So if let's say I have a 1 meter here that to measure the CO2, so I can use this direct measurement to count my CO2 per year, how much, based on the flow rate, based on the concentration, I can convert it. Third one actually on the material balance. So how many carbon in, then I take the, let's say, raw material carbon content, and then after that go through the process, and then I have ashes. So ashes, what's the carbon content? So I minus out this one, I get that kind of the material, based on the material balance, I can account for how many CO2 being generated. So this is 3 ways of how we quantify the emission. Yeah, so I think that is actually on the carbon accounting lah. So next one, I just gone through fast on this part. This goes about 1 already. So on the renewable energy part, I mentioned just now, is actually we upgrading or we replace our old plant. So we have a biomass fire boiler, because the cocoa shell is actually a pretty good calorific value. So we are converting this kind of biomass. So in carbon accounting, when you burn this kind of the natural fossil fuel, fuel, it actually is not account. So whenever the CO2 being generated one is not account under our 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐬. So that's why it's actually encouraged. That's why we call it as a renewable energy. So for this part, if let's say from our this project one, we're able to save about 12,000 tons of the CO2 compared to the, if let's say we are using a diesel fire to produce the steam. Basically for this boiler is actually burning the fuel to produce the steam. This steam actually will be used by our plant usage lah. So by having this kind of the thing, is actually we are able to save about 12,000 tons of the CO2 per year. So which is actually equivalent to reducing our reliance on the diesel by saving about 3.5 million litre, which is equivalent to about, let's say talk about a return trip JB to KL, the truck that usage one is about 60 truck per day. So that is actually is the analogy that maybe for your understanding. So that's on the renewable energy. Second, actually, of course, just now I think from previous speaker also they talk about the solar energy. So this is another thing also. So it's worth for us to invest into this part because the payback period is less than 4 years. So also doing this project, actually we're able to save about 800 tons CO2 annually. So which is equivalent to about this 800 tons, because we know that is planting a tree that, if let's say for a mature one, they to absorb this 1 ton of the CO2 per year, they need to have 43. So by having this kind of understanding, so this 800 tons is actually equivalent to about we are planting 30,000 of the mature tree to absorb the CO2 annually. So this is one of the project that we can achieve. So another one is on the, we used to have a boiler that burning the diesel. So now we changed it to the LPG type because actually it's a cleaner fuel. So by having this kind of cleaner fuel, we are able to save about 250,000 tons of the CO2, which is equivalent to about more than 10,000 plants that we need to plant now, which is for your understanding. So I think that want to wrap up my so-called plan level, that this is some of the initiative that we have. But of course, we still continue our journey. That, for example, we still need to establish more target. Now we are already engaging our third party to come up with the framework and also the manual. So it's our time that we need to set a target and also a metric. Or by, for example, CO2 one, we need to have a so-called net zero by which year, half of the reduction is actually by which year. So that is actually the thing. And water consumption by intensity, how much actually the water consumption per ton of our product we produce. So that is actually we need to identify the thing, to strategize the thing. And also just I mentioned about processing plant actually closer to the bean source that at Ivory Coast. So that will help us to reduce a lot of this kind of the carbon generation in our entire carbon footprint. Of course, we need to cultivate the sustainable culture, enhance the workplace safety and health. That is under the social part as a ESG. And then also we have a group company carbon footprint. Right now, actually, just now talk about it. Actually, we start with Malaysia plant, but ultimately we'll be go for Indonesia one, China one, and future one, the Ivory Coast. So, and also we need to have a sustainable manufacturing. Now we need to set the indicator that is actually per ton of the product I produce one, actually how much energy I use. And also more sustainable sourcing program, that more activity we adopted the farmer, a group of farmer from the Indonesia, more farmer to be educated on that part. So we still continue work with our customer side on this kind of the program. And also, of course, the talent and community development as well. So I think that one to sum up my today's sharing of my ESG. So I hope that this information able to help you to have a better idea on in terms of the plant side, actually what we can do on the ESG initiative. Yeah, so that's to end my presentation. Hope that you enjoy and can benefit from my sharing. Thanks. Yeah, pass to you,
Thank you so
Datin.
much, Vincent. Actually, we had a lot of questions on the 𝐒𝐻𝐞𝐫 calculation. I'm very excited that you actually managed to give us the whole math. I'm quite amazed at the whole process, because we had a lot of interest on those things. So in interest of time, I've just got only one question that I'm going to just check with you, because initially you did mention that you have programs for the cocoa farmers. Do you do a continuous tracking, and is there a system, how do you fulfill international sort of regulation, when you're supplying to your international MNCs?
Oh, on that part actually is, of course, for our this business is on the ESG initiative or the sustainability initiative is pretty driven by our customer, because right now talk about on the thing is actually is a lot of those big company is become a major player to influence under their supply chain, to engage them in order for them to commit on the sustainability part. So on this part actually is they do talk about the certified bean or certified sustainable bean. So that kind of thing is actually we need to in order for us to get a premium that kind of the pay. I mean that if let's say I supply this product to Nestle or Hershey or whatever thing, so I certified this one is actually a bean certified sustainable sourcing one. So by that one actually then we can fetch a premium one. So in order for us to fetch for the premium rate on this part, now of course in terms of traceability, tracking the thing is how the farmer work their so-called their living costs actually being so-called improve a lot or not, on what kind of community activity that we have one, and in terms of the productivity within one, let's say they have how many hectare of the plant, how much actually is the bean being produced. So this is actually is some of the indicator that we can collate the thing and then actually share with our customer side, actually saying that this is how we track the thing to ensure that it's actually is in terms of quality side and also traceability and transparency is we are able to demonstrate to them. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. So which means to say, just as much as you track your suppliers, your customers track you as well.
Yes, correct. So that's the entire, each of us actually play a part to ensure that the supply chain is actually is able to be demonstrated to them. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. And you've answered a lot of people's question on their GHG accounting. So thank you very much, Vincent.
Okay.
We stay safe, and we're very grateful that you decided to join us today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So everybody, we hope you've had a fruitful and engaging time at our ESG Customer Day. So let's start our ESG journey. Our path may be varied, our pace may be different, but destination is the same: to sustain the planet that sustains us, to build a sustainable future. We have some exciting collaboration to share with you. To announce this, I would like to invite Yang Berbahagia, Dato Sulaiman, Group CEO, AmBank Group, onto our virtual stage. Dato?
Thank you, Zameema. I mean, I know it's been a long day, but I certainly appreciate, your attendance as well as our speakers today. And really, I'm quite impressed with our two partners who has shown how they have take charge of ESG in their domain. In conjunction with this session, this is our ESG day. We actually have two sessions. One in the morning is with our customers, with all of you. And in the afternoon, we're also going to have with our shareholders as well to talk about ESG. And because we have approximately 700 registrants, for this event, we are proud to announce that, we have decided to have a collaboration with Yayasan Hijau with the intention of planting 100 million trees in Malaysia by 2025. And we are proud to be part of it, and we will contribute the number of trees based on number of people who registered for this event, which is 780 trees. I'm also happy and proud to say that we are the first financial institution that has collaborated with Yayasan Hijau with the intention of planting more trees. And why? And why would that be? You would say, as we all know, today, the only commercially viable way of removing CO2, which is the larger component of GHG, accounting for 80% of the GHG emissions of the world, actually comes from the way to remove it is by having more trees. The trees out there that we have actually helps to remove, CO2 out there. Hence, the more trees we plant, the more trees we have, the more removal we can do, the faster we are in getting to that net zero ambition. Net zero is really about, at the end of the day, is that the GHG emissions that we have against the carbon that we can remove, and we can do that well, we won't see as much temperature rise in the world as has been predicted. We don't do anything. I mean, we don't do anything. I think, as we all know, the temperature rise is expected to be something like 2.5 degrees. And when you do that, you have all these calamities, issues on the environment, which leads to, as mentioned by our PwC speaker, diseases as a result. So as I've mentioned, in this collaboration, we'll be planting, because you guys have attended this session with us, 780 trees. And the location will be in Taman Eco Rimba, which is in Bukit Sungai Putih in Cheras, which is right smack in Wilayah Persekutuan. And the intention is to reforest this forest reserve. It is a 26 acres piece of land, and the trees will comprise of 772 camphor trees. This is what you call it 𝐭𝐫𝐬𝐿 tree in Malay, 772 trees. And then we have 4 tampoi trees and 4 rambai trees. And why we choose these trees? Because these trees are the trees that can remove a lot of carbon dioxide. And based on the estimates by Yayasan Hijau, the 780 trees will remove close to approximately 1,000 tons of CO2 per year. With Malaysia's individual carbon footprint of about 8 tons per person per year, our trees will be able to support 125 individual Malaysians' carbon emissions per year. So 125 people, I'm sure there's a lot of people born in a year in Malaysia, at least will be carbon neutral in that sense, every year. by the removing of the carbon emissions, that they do by these trees, these 780 trees. So last Saturday, on the 8th of January, we had the first 11 trees planted by our staff. And I would like to show you the video to have a look that this is real, this is what we do, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do a lot more of. So please have a look.
All of us recognize that the country and also the world is having a big challenge. Last 2 years, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the end of last year, unfortunately, the country or major parts of the country was hit by floods. So these, to us, are actually calls for us to embrace sustainability in a serious fashion. These are painful reminders that we don't take care of the environment, then the environment will not take care of us.
Okay, there you go, ladies and gentlemen, the first 11 trees planted. And really, we would like to encourage, more organizations, of course, like you, not only to embrace ESG, but to contribute towards the removal of carbon from the environment. I think, as you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic, the recent severe floods, all these are sending us a clear message that we, as citizens, as corporations, must do more to really incorporate sustainability into, our ambitions. And today marks a very important day as we launch the first ESG day with you that we've had. And a special thanks to really our honored speakers today. We have from PwC, Nik Shahrizal, from SME Corp, Ms. Kausalya, from PKT Logistics, my good friend, Dato Sri Michael, and from 𝐒𝐸𝐞𝐫𝐬, Mr. Vincent Tang. We really appreciate, your contribution. So once again, thank you very much. See you next time. Thank you again and stay safe. Okay, Zameema, we're done, yeah?
Yes, Dato, we're done. Thank you for all our participants, our customers, our collaborators. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.